All right. Welcome back to Legally Everywhere with y'all. We are legally everywhere looking into everything. Hopefully, you were able to catch the premiere of the episode today. Because my camera is mighty close. Okay. Hopefully, you were able to catch the episode today that aired, which is a part of our Project 25 analysis, right? We did a deep into some of the content. We wanted to look and see what is actually going on and look at some of the guidance that we offer, or better yet, that was offered on Project 25. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my framework because that's what we need to actually kind of do a little bit of orientation to at this particular point. Okay? Of pretty much what you should be seeing as the cover at this particular point. Let me see if it'll allow me to kind of zoom in a little bit more. Okay. We're going to just kind of rock with it at this point. Okay. So I want to look out and see what is it that you all see. Okay. Close enough. Close enough. Okay. So here's what I want to explain about this overall system that I have here. I have a whole agenda because it's really important to me to orient everyone to what you're actually seeing on my channel, right? So I feel like everyone has different entry points, but how I would like you to consume the information is I wanted to make sure that you actually start with the course information because that's where I teach you the system, right? I teach you a system of how to look at receipts. Because pretty much what I have here, I had to look at my videos and think, how do I actually process information and how do I present it to you all to make sure that I actually give you a guided method? Because if you're anything like me, you like visuals. So what I want to do is actually offer you a guided visual. Okay? All right. Make sure I go keep up with my actual agenda here. There was any additional things that I wanted to note. There weren't any specific things before I jumped in. Okay. So pretty much I want to kind of give you like just the overall comprehensive, like this is pretty much the method that I use. So I have to think about how does my brain orient and how can I make sure that I am being transparent and involved in how I'm explaining my process, right? So really this is pretty much the method behind the headlines, the policies, and the global events, the way you see me present them here. This is kind of like the method behind it so we can kind of have a similar approach to how we're looking at information if that's something that you're interested in doing, okay? So here's the agenda. We're going to walk through the how to read the receipts, which is the Start Here course, right? And you'll notice that's kind of what I know is like our entry point. What we'll also do is I'll walk you through what I call a stress test. That's outlined at another point on here, but I'll show you what a stress test is. And I'll be honest, most news we get doesn't meet the stress test. And once you've encountered what I call the stress test, you'll find that most news doesn't meet it. And you'll find that you're often looking for information just like I do, trying to address what's missing from the stress test. That's crucial, right? Because a lot of times that stress test information is critical information we need to make what informed decisions. So the stress test is what, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. Okay? We'll go through why most news doesn't actually pass that, right? Because what they don't give us critical information like who, the what, the when, the where, why. Like, why do I need to be involved in this? Why do we need to be investing our money in that, right? Who's sitting at these tables? Like, you know, what's going on? When is it supposed to be happening? How can we have no timeline, right? There's lack of accountability that often comes with that. So that's why I say the test, right? The A test, the stress test, so to speak. We'll talk about how systems actually function, and sometimes they don't function. So the failure of systems, which is like often every system has like a certain level of accountability is supposed to be there, right? They have these rules, these regulations. The question becomes, who's going to force them to do what they're supposed to do with, if they're quote unquote out of order, out of pocket, if they are in violation, right? What are those regulatory bodies, beings, entities, right? We're going to talk just very briefly about that, because once again, this is a quick orientation. It's not us diving into each concept, because there are already videos on this channel that outline that, but just to kind of orient you to where to locate some of those things and kind of what's here, so that you're not kind of overstimulated, like what's going on, what's happening here. I can assure you everything has a proper space and order. Okay. So that's that area that we will cover. So we have the comparator analysis, because once you have the initial system, which would be this area right here, this is like your initial entry point right here. You go like this, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, right? We go into what the receipt type, and then we go into like the movements and mechanics. I will move this up so that you can see it a little bit more clearly. Let me see if it's moving on your screen. Okay, perfect. So move this up just a little bit. Okay. So we're gonna break through all of this. I'm trying to keep it on the PDF. Y'all know I normally like to have my Canva up where I can be a little bit more interactive, but once again, that's kind of how that portion is going to be broken down. I'm happy to just leave my agenda alone, just move through this image. But I just want to kind of explain to you what I'm walking through. I really hate when people don't brief you and debrief you. I feel like that's necessary, right, in the process. So we have that system, which is your initial system. That portion is in course 1. It's already available on the channel, already a complete series, right? That's a complete course. That gives you the foundation and the system structure to know how to look at the real world stress test situations, right? That moves us into the comparator section, which I'll break down all these. And then we kind of go and look at the global events that are happening, right? We have the Iran series, we have the Venezuela series, we have the Greenland series. These are all their own separate series. You can find those indexed as their own playlists. Then you have your actual receipt analysts. These are all their own individual contexts, right, within the lens of the receipt types. And we'll move straight through. So as you see, we start at this entry point, and then we come here. How do you read them? And we move downward. So just so you have a visualization for how we're moving through this particular mapping, right? So we talk about economic elements that are put into place. We'll talk about the regulatory pieces. And then we'll talk about the very bottom line, which you see my face is actually covering, just so you can get a visual. Is it moving on your end? Okay, so I'll just do the arrows. So as you can see, we have some who enforces the regulatory issues, right? So we have the Olivia Pope archetype that we've been recently covering. That was last week's mini series where we talked about Olivia Pope analogy, right? Do we have our modern day Olivia Pope? And that was through the lens of like Miss Condoleezza Rice. She's most known for being a part of the Bush administration. The funny thing is, actually, Olivia Pope was based off another lady. They said she was a combination of two ladies, but she's actually based off another lady who was part of the, as they say, Papa Bush. But George Bush, his administration, George W. Bush is the person who people most associate with Miss Condoleezza Rice, and that was who we were making a comparison to, mostly because she has what Soviet Union policy strategic background, and she also was very much involved in the Middle East engagements during the Bush administration. So she has a very unique background, and we talked about her strategic background, right? She originally started off as an educator who taught Soviet Union doctrines, right? That's what she taught at Stanford. So that was kind of like the more strategic person. Then we have what I would classify as enforcers, right? So if you watch some of my earlier material, we talked through the lens of pop culture. Most of the archetypes come through a lens of pop culture just because it's really easy and accessible. Most people are very comfortable with those characters, and I'm able to lay a template of the character, right, on top of the actual strategic actors that we might actually see in real life events. It just makes it easier to understand. There'll be pieces that absolutely fit perfectly, and there'll be pieces that do not fit, and that's totally fine, right? So we have our enforcers, and then you have a specialist. This will be a new series that will come out as an upcoming series. It's not quite out yet, but it's one that is in development. This is the John Wick, right? This is the specialist that comes in. I won't foreshadow too much about their particular background, but I think you will very much enjoy this series when it comes out. That gives you a very quick down and dirty of that, okay? So we're going to move through this very quickly, okay? So you walk in the entry point. Everyone comes in at different points, right? You come in, this is the entry point. You say, how do you read pretty much the receipts, okay? We're going to talk about the general stress test. You walk in and you get a piece of information, right? On the series, when I can help it, if you come to my channel and we, just able to talk, I'm going to walk you through a process that's going to be called ABC, right? That's this structure right here, moving you straight through, right? This is where you see index right here. But in life, what happens is a current event happens, right? Something happens, and then we start looking in reverse, right? So we kind of go, okay, this current event happened. So we get up through the news, right? Okay, now it makes us want to go look at a legal document. Okay, well, what policies do they say are out there? Okay, that makes us go look, okay, what kind of historical things can I locate, right? So you're doing it in the reverse order than how I would naturally present it, right? Because we want to start off with the actual system, like how is the system structured, and then move down, okay? So in the actual course that's online already, I break the system down and I use as a learning tool, I use the music industry, right? And we talk about what happens, right? Pretty much how when failures occur, the individual absorbs what the impact. That is pretty much the central theme that occurs, right? So we go here and we get information, right? So how do you read the receipts? You go in and you look for a simple question. Who, what, when, where, why? If you don't have that stress test completed, then you start to look for the piece that's missing, right? Because if you're missing the who, you're missing accountability, right? Who do you hold accountable for the situation that you're placed in, right? If you're missing the why, it becomes a conversation of intent, right? It becomes a conversation of motivation. Like, why are we involved in this, right? Because still to this point, to a degree, I take trouble and issue with certain current events that have been happening because we ask, why is it happening? Oh, I feel like. You feel like. You feel like it was a threat? Can you identify, what the threat was? Why we made certain movements? Can you identify? Oh, I just feel like if this happened, this is not a mood board, right? I need metrics. I need to know mechanisms, right? I need to understand what was the motive. I know y'all like, girl, that's a lot of alliterations, but when certain things happen, we need to understand why. Why are we in this situation to start with? So that would be the missing piece, right? The why. We need that answer. That's critical information. So once again, missing metrics. What? Accountability, all of that, right? How can we understand the movements if you're not explaining to us the process? Like, how do we even get here? You know what I mean? Those elements, if that's missing, those become the areas that I start to look for. So then we move back down. Now we're trying to collect receipts, right? Because we're trying to figure out what happened. Why do we have gaps? We have gaps in information. Gaps in information make me uncomfortable. I like to have information. So once again, now we're looking at receipts. We go to the receipts. First thing you're gonna look for is probably the news, right? Always keep in mind that as honest and straightforward as we like to feel like news stations and news places can be, they always have an angle, right? And even when people don't feel like they're overly postured, you still have to keep in mind from what lens they come from, right? So say, for instance, when I present information, I find that I have worked hard to diversify the way that I present information and the way that I speak to information, but I am American and I have a US-centric viewpoint. I go from my US-centric viewpoint and I expand out globally, right? Because of my exposure and because of the way that I have socialized myself, I'm able to expand out. But you can't deny the fact that the origins comes from a certain viewpoint, right? So keep that in mind when you deal with news stations. They're going to have a certain viewpoint that they come from. It's kind of like when you did science fair projects in youth, right? You start with a hypothesis. You spend the whole time trying to prove or disprove your original belief, right? So that means you had a posture and you had an angle. Make sense? Okay. So anytime you get information, also keep in mind that there's a posture. And that's why it's important to get multiple receipts from different angles so that you can get the most possible full view that you can possibly get out of the situation. Okay. So now we go look at legal documents. I'm curious about the legal findings. I want to know what they said. I want to know what they put into writing because they're accountable for what they put into legal writing, right? And often in some places, you are held accountable for knowing what people put in legal writing, right? So I'm always looking for that. If there's filings, orders, the law, statutes, all these pieces, right? I want to see what they put, right? Recently, I just did some videos about sanctions, right? I want to see what they put in there, right? Policy. We read a few of those. Historical elements, right? Anything that I can find, because historical elements become what? Documents at some point become historical references, right? So I'm curious what previous administrations did, maybe what happened in previous wars, right? So we'll see things like that come up, right? I've done comparators where I've talked about Vietnam and the last time the discussion of draft came out, right? Relevant to what's happening in Iran right now, right? I talked about, I haven't seen anyone else do it yet, so I'm curious. I'll keep looking to see if anyone else is also covering that. Right? Because we also know there's other things kind of like in the back burner, right? And you'll see that lens actually be directly connected, right? Our strategic operator, our strategic actor, right? When I talk about archetypes, just to kind of give you that mind map setup, right? This specialist will actually be directly connected to the Iran series, right? But this series is coming up. It's not where we're at quite yet, but you kind of see how we use the archetypes to kind of help understand certain movements of certain situations, right? As we look at the different series. So after we looked at the receipts, right, that we were able to obtain, we then go to look at movement, like my mediation lens, because as a mediator, I'm always looking, is what I'm seeing right now helping us move closer to a resolution or further away, right? Are we getting more degrees of separation? Are we coming closer to a resolution? Are we getting closer to a win-win situation? Because sometimes you'll see something, you're like, ooh, I'm wondering how they're going to engage in negotiation now because of maybe the rhetoric that they're using, the positionality, the language. I'm always looking at that posture. So that would be this situation. When I say stall, it's like delayed or potentially an impasse where like, I don't see that anything's going to come out of this, right? So once again, that's this section. As I've been saying, pretty much we can start anywhere, but that's generally the fluid movement of that part, right? So from there, once again, you have that stress test, who, what, when, where, why. Then you have like contracts, power, the industry elements, right? all of that is covered in the course, right? That's covered in the course. So you would kind of see, from the most part, the United States, that goes under common law. A lot of the other places for which some of the things have been happening, I've been seeing that they also have shared in some of that common law language and background. So that helps us kind of understand what we're looking at, because certain rules and doctrines are in place, right, when you have that structure. So kind of understanding that, we talk about the power dynamics. And also understanding in common law, if it's not written, you are usually subjected to whatever the industry standards are. So understanding sometimes there are limitations in what's not written in negotiating the contracts, right? Who has to absorb that, right? So we got to really see how that can impact an individual when we looked at the industry standards, specifically focusing on the music industry when we did our first course setup, right? Which would be that very first case study that we offer as a point of reference, right? So you take all of that structure, right? And then we dive into how does that impact you as an individual? Because you say, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. You talk about all these systems. Why do I even want to learn all that? Why do I want to? Because it impacts you as an individual, right? When these people sit in rooms and they negotiate, nobody's ever going to sit there and negotiate for them to take on harm, for them to take on a liability, for them to absorb a risk. What they do is they mitigate. What they do is they shift liability. What they're going to do is they're going to ping pong it back and forth to each other, right? Until it sits in the middle. And then it gets knocked off the table. And guess who's getting knocked on top of? It gets placed to you as the consumer. It gets placed to you as the constituent. It gets placed to you as a client, as a civilian, right? All the C's, right? All the alliterations. It gets sent to you. It gets sent to me. It gets sent to us. And we have to absorb it. We have to absorb that impact. And it's then kind of left on us to figure out what our coping skills are to be able to manage the risk or the threat of safety that we have experienced, right? Once again, elements of this are covered throughout the course. But you have to figure out how you're going to absorb the impact. So the purpose behind the series is to help you be more informed, so you can decide how you want to manage the way that you experience some of these things, because you can put some protective factors in place as you're trying to understand what is happening in current events. But that only happens when you're informed, right? There's information that's public information, but if you don't know how to access it, it's not really that accessible, right? It's not a resource unless you know how to use it. So we take that system and foundation and we roll that over into looking at the more larger current events as they're actively rolling out, which is a little bit more complex and more difficult than, something that's already happened where you have all the information. That's why we once again learn to look for what the gaps, right? The gaps that exist in the A test. When they give you news, you can start saying, hey, what's the when? Who's the what, the when, the where, the why, right? Who is involved, right? You start to do that as you get your current event news, and you move it through that stress test. So we have our main series, right? We have the one that's newest, which is Iran. We have our Greenland series, which was series 2. And then we have Venezuela series, which was number 1, which is becoming a little bit more buzz based off of recent current events. Once again, we kind of jump into the receipt analyst. So there's mini series kind of content there. But more so, we'll just keep it this way. So once you go into the Venezuela content, or better yet, the main series content, right? Your Iran series, Venezuela, and Greenland, you break down, each one has a receipt analyst, right? So we're looking at what's being listed in Project 25, because we've been noticing that seems to be recommendation, foundational information, right? That has shown quite a bit of alignment. So we kind of read through and see, okay, some of these events don't make sense. Why are these things happening? Because we have so many gaps that are happening. We're trying to fill those gaps. So we go to look, what did Project 25 potentially say? What guidance and recommendations they offer? And do we see any kind of alignment with it? Does anything kind of line up where that makes a little bit more sense now? We look at executive orders because that's what the executive put in place, right? We also look and see if Congress put anything, passed anything. We looked at that, right? And laws that went into place. Or did they at least put something forth to be signed in, right? To go through that process. I look at UN documents too, because we're talking about global events, right? I look at messages. I look at actual resolution. We had a resolution we read recently. We look at all of that. Then we go down again, right? And then we kind of put it through different lenses here. We start to ask the question of, that's another series that happens to a degree, right? Regulatory failure, what happens? Now, the interesting one with that one, which is very interesting, is just mostly about accountability. Like, how is it handled? And kind of have like a dream team, so to speak, with the WWE accountability. If you could just have someone kind of come in and make sure that people kind of operated like how you felt like they should operate. And that was your Suge Knight and Debo with regards to like Campbell's soup and like the food industry and all these different things that happen with the food regulatory stuff, right? And the CFPB, right? So you have a whole little miniseries dedicated to regulatory failures. We have the power levels, right? Because different stories hit different ways. Without going into too much, you have the different layers. You have how it hits you as an individual. Maybe you have a small business, or you classify as a small business, and certain things might hit your business, and then it also might hit you as the individual, right? You have things power-wise that might have a hit to your economy, like your nation. Then you have some things that might be global that might hit multiple economies, multiple nations, right? Power plays a very unique factor, right? And that is a particular lens channel. You have economic elements too. Once again, we've had quite a bit of conversation about the economy and how different things are happening, how one economy can affect another one. Once again, I would refer you to the main series for that information. But definitely, if you're like very interested in the oil discussion, Venezuela will probably be the first set of content that I would take you to. A lot of them will kind of cross-reference others because, once again, these are global events that are kind of shaping in real time. So you find that there's lots of, let's say, commingling that's happening, right? And then with Greenland, that was a big discussion on minerals. Right. Technically, Iran has a discussion on oil as well, but like Venezuela was the main conversation on oil. Greenland was minerals. There's lots to be said about how that affects, currency and the overall economy, and money as a whole, because we classify it as what that girl. But once again, you'll dive into those series and you'll be able to see that there. When people are not following what is written, right? The rules, or sometimes even the non-written rules, like you have things that just seem like they're pretty standard things as rules of engagement. The question becomes, who comes to regulate that, right? Because you have a rule of law. Okay, who's enforcing it? In Venezuela content, we talked about there was an arbitration that went out and there was a ruling, right? And the question was, who gonna make them pay, right? How do you regulate? How do you enforce? So sometimes you have people behind the scenes. Sometimes you have people who are a little bit more in limelight, right? Some people, but most of these people fall behind the scenes, right? So there's strategic operator, right? The strategist, the consultant, the well-known, well-respected. Let me put the screen up. You can't see me moving the mouse to see it. Okay. So you can see the strategic operator, right? You have the enforcer. Like if you followed general entertainment from the 90s, right? Suge Knight and Debo, it's a certain kind of aesthetic that come with them. They was regulating things, right? You just respected them when you saw them running through. I don't know why they did Debo. Like, I kept trying to play with the system to see if I can. When I wrote out all my thoughts, I literally uploaded a picture and they still gave me this person. But Debo, you kind of have the archetype idea, right? And then you have a specialist. Very pragmatic, very like straight to the books specialist that's going to come in and regulate a certain kind of way and hold people accountable. that is the general structure of that, to give you an idea of what you would see on this channel. I'm going to show you it just another quick way to zoom out into the specifics, right? These are the setups, right? So you have an Iran series, you have a Venezuela series, you have the Greenland series, right? You have comparators that are offered, right? We have regulatory. So you have like that Campbell Soup WWE accountability mini series. You have that CFPB investigations and different things that were happening relevant to like money, which are once again 2 regulatories. So this is food regulatory, this is money regulatory. Accountability, right? That's where you've seen these enforcers kind of come in, right? Well, the more so the fantasy discussion on the enforcers kind of coming in to regulate, because we're like, why are these not seeming to be regulated when in fact they have all these regulatory rules, guidelines, and all of that, right? Then we have the Project 25 series where I'm going in and reading and I'm giving you the receipts real time. If you are very interested in that material and you want to be a part of the premiering, right? I am going to show these live like old school TV vibes. I'm a millennial. I liked when we used to go watch TV live. The premiere structure that I was able to establish here allows me to give you like a meditative space before I start the video. So about 15, no more than 30 minutes beforehand, if you want to just kind of go on my channel, there'll be a countdown, but it's more like a meditative corner, to be quite honest. I set it up where it's just really relaxing. I want people to be able to be grounded, to take some deep breaths. Once again, it's a trauma-informed structure that I offer here. I don't want to stress you out with news. I want you to feel informed and able to advocate for yourself the best way you feel like you can, and the best way you know how. I'll be able to put coping strategies in place to manage all the things that are happening. I don't want to be a part of the stressor or a stressful situation. So once again, we'll walk into the situation with a mindfulness vibe, right? And then I'll introduce to you the information. So that is in the premiere setup for the episodes. And right now we are currently in a Project 25 reading and receipt gathering, right? So today you had a live that came out when not live, my apologies. You had a premiere episode showing. When I do premieres and I introduce upcoming series, they will come out at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right now, we're moving into episode 3. Episode 3 will air tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be about 7 episodes in this series. We are on episode 3. Effective tomorrow, episode 3 will come out. We did episode 2 today at 7 o'clock. Thank you all who were able to attend and join. We have the Project 25 and executive order reads, once again, that are kind of like their own, right? Because we want to see context. I like to be able to map what was the impact, right? So sometimes we got to let some of those marinate. Y'all know how I said, let it marinate. We cook over here, right? So we got to let it marinate a little bit so we can get to see what's the impact. How was it absorbed, right? So some of this will be forthcoming. Some of it I do real time. So when it actually comes out, I'll read it real time. But as far as a series, I like to get a little bit more of the impact before I get to adding the receipts, right? So this one will be forthcoming as far as the mini series. But if you want to catch it live, you certainly can when we actually read what's happening and we're reacting, to a degree with relevant receipts that have been verified real time. I'll do that. But as far as the series element, this will be forthcoming. Once again, there is a John Wick mini series that will be forthcoming. Which I am very excited about. We just finished the Olivia Pope miniseries last week. So we're having a lot of fun over here. We are really, like I said, when we be getting into these receipts, this is what kids do, right? 8. We be getting to these receipts, okay? Y'all getting episodes. We are getting structured micro learning. This is what I would say multi-module level education structure that we're offering here, because I really want to make sure this is accessible to people in the community. We are in election cycles where you have an opportunity to leverage your voice to get the outcomes that you feel are necessary in your community. I don't tell people how to vote. I just ask that you do it, that you be engaged civically, that you understand, that you share the information that you have with other people so they can be informed and so that they may be engaged as well, right? At the end of the day, we are all in this together. We're all learning together. So lives are where I usually do my free form mind mapping. I show you how I map things and how I move real time, right? When I have things packaged, that's when it's, I kind of condense and concise it. I try not to give you more than 30 minutes worth of content at a time. Generally, it falls between 12 and 15 minutes. So it's highly digestible, something you could work between a break at work, right? Because we got to be real. People are working and doing things, or you got families you tend to. You might not have hours to sit around listening and looking at stuff, but I try to make sure that what I give you is highly digestible. So my hope is that you can enjoy the content that I have presented to you once again. This is kind of what we're looking at, right? We have multiple series that are going on. We have multiple mini-series that are happening on this channel, right? Once again, we have the Venezuela, Greenland, Iran main series information, okay? But even before you touch that, I want you to go look at that course that's already online. It's actually, when you combine all that material, it's actually like maybe an hour max, right? That gives you the full system, the whole framework. From top to bottom, that course is less than an hour. Explains everything, gives you the whole system, even gives you a whole case study, which is why it made it to an hour. That helps you be able to look at the Iran, the Greenland, and the Venezuela series, which are all indexed as their own playlist. So if you're like, I just want to look at that, you can go straight to the playlist. You'll go on my channel, you notice I have multiple playlists. That's because people have different tastes. That's why I call it a receipt buffet. You come and get what you want, everybody eating, but we're not eating the same exact thing, right? You want to chew on different things at different times, and it's whatever your pleasure is, right? These are your mini-series, which would be, food regulatory, right? So that'd be like your Campbell's soup kind of setup, right? You have your CFPB, which is the money market. You have your Project 25 alignments that we were able to say real time. Like, why do we even have the Iran series, the Greenland, the Venezuela, and up and coming Russia and China series, right? Why do we have those, right? What foundation, what guidance do we see has been offered or been put out there to explain maybe some of the movements and the postures? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense until you see me literally pull all these receipts and we see that this has been put down. The foundation was put down a long time ago. We're just now seeing it because of the way that it's being carried out. But a lot of this has been put foundationally down a long time ago. And once we go look, we're like, wow, once you've seen certain things, you just can't unsee it. So I encourage you to maybe even take a picture of the cover for this video, because that is the guide to understanding how to move through this channel. I will be indexing this in the community, so you'll have this visual there. Additionally, the PDF I'm looking at right now, I'm going to index in the community so you guys can look at it and see it at your own pleasure and your own leisure. Additionally, I will be adding these into the graphics so that you can be tracking and mapping, where we're at, so that it all makes sense to you. Right? Just so you can, once again, this is typically what you normally see when I put them in the actual videos. You're, once again, your stress test, your historical patterns, right? Your legal authority, your economic lever, your strategic actors. What that I help you identify strategic actors by what using those archetypes, the Olivia Pope, the Debo, the Suge Knight, the John Wicks, right? The people who are able to make certain kind of moves, right? The power holders, the decision makers, the advisors, right? We look at geopolitical context, like some of these situations, there's a entanglement. I remember a term being used a few years ago, entanglement between some of these places, a relationship, right? And we can see it a little bit more clearly when we're able to identify where they fall. You know, are they getting closer to a resolution or not? Right? Is it clear who absorbs the impact? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to negotiate for them to absorb that impact. You are the one who absorbs that impact. Okay, so that is the overall orientation to what you're experiencing here on the channel. You have the opportunity to see things live when they occur. You have the opportunity to see some premieres. If you want to see a premiere, child, I'm there with you. When it premieres, I'm right there with you. I'm in the comments, like I'm actually in the comments right now for this live, right? Thank you so much for that compliment about the way that this content was produced. I definitely was very intentional about it, and I really appreciate that you all like it. I do not take for granted that this, although I just developed this channel and started this channel recently, that I have had so many views from different places all across the globe. I appreciate you all for appreciating my content. I will do my best to give you a good service and to give you really good content. I'm really excited about the structure that I currently have. And with that being said, it is truly, you know, my pleasure to be here with you this evening. I said I was going to be brief, so I'm literally wrapping this up. But once again, you see that there are so many opportunities to peruse through different kinds of content, and hopefully you're enjoying it. Hopefully you like everything that you're experiencing here on Legally Everywhere. What shall we look? We are everywhere, looking into everything. And I really hope that you enjoy what I'm putting down, right? Because I do spend the time to be very intentional in what I present to you all. I thought it was really important that I give you a good framing of like how I see things so you can understand how it's being presented to you. Once again, thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you so much for watching my videos, even taking time to listen to how I'm perceiving the information and really seeing the patterns that I've been able to map, because I've been having so much fun with this project. And I really do thank you all for being a part of this community. If you're interested, definitely like, subscribe, comment. It lets YouTube know that you are interested in this content and that you recommend that other people have access to it. So definitely continue to watch. Stay tuned. We have more content. Tomorrow, anticipate that we will be premiering episode 3 for What the Project 25 Reads and Receipts. Child, yes, it is. Listen, the receipts are receding, okay? Like when I tell you the things that I've been able to find, the way I've been digging, the receipts is just mind-blowing. I'm just going to be real with you. It's just mind-blowing. Sometimes I get shocked myself because I don't expect to find as much as I find. But in fact, it's public information. I do find it. So my hope is that you'll see the receipts. You can screenshot and look in, dive in deeper yourself if you want to, or you just look at what I found and be like, wow, I didn't know that was happening. You'll be shocked. You really would. So stay tuned. I'll continue to dig and further build out this program that we kind of have here. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Like, subscribe, comment, and more importantly, come back and see me in the next video. This is Adrienne from Legally Everywhere with Child. We looking into everything. Until next time, see you.